Enlighten our minds and hearts, O God, by the working of your Spirit, that we may be brought into that fullness of truth promised us by your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. I've mentioned to you before that for each Sunday of the year, and actually for each day of the year, but particularly for each Sunday, there are particular readings that are what are called appointed for that day. And most of the churches, at least in the Western Church, follow what's called the lectionary about that. So in most of the churches, Protestant, Catholic, Episcopalian, even some Orthodox, they're going to be reading the same readings today. So it's a way in which the church is drawn together. Part of those readings, and the one that I didn't choose for the text, the one from Hebrews, is a difficult passage from Luke for a lot of people. And I know it's something that I struggled with for a long, long time. Let me share it with you so that you get some idea. And these sound like Jesus being harsh with us. This is after the section that we had about the faithful and the unfaithful slaves last time. This is from 13, beginning at verse 49. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it's completed. Do you think that I've come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided. Father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Boy, there was a long time I struggled with that. Do you struggle with that text? It doesn't sound like what we usually think about with the presence of Jesus, because we keep thinking that with the presence of Jesus, and you know the songs about he walks before us and beside us and behind us and he's always with us and so forth, we assume that this means that Jesus brings peace. And what we're surprised then when we see a passage like this, when Jesus says, well, you know, that's really not what it's about. The peace is a true thing, but it doesn't come without the difficulty. The passage from Hebrews is particularly effective in that. If you were to look that up and look up the passage there from Hebrews in 12, if you look in the chapter before it, chapter 11, you'll see that the author of Hebrews lists a number of the people from the past, the history of faith and so forth, and the things they went through, including the sufferings that they had, and he retells in part some of the stories about Moses and some of the other heroes and heroines of the Old Testament. He even mentions some, he says, I don't have time to go into all of them. Even those who were suffered and they died and so forth. He says, those who were split in half. I noticed in one of the Bibles that I use for reference and so forth, it has a little note with that being split in half. The tradition is, and the legend and tradition in the Hebrew tradition, is that the prophet Isaiah was sawn in half as his punishment at the end of his life and so forth. So these folks, I mean, you talk about, okay, Lord, in these examples you've given us, where the heck's the peace, right? Well, he talks about that then in the passage that we had. And the first part of that passage is particularly effective, and I'm sure we've all heard this and repeated it and so forth, about the great cloud of witnesses, right? And usually what we do is we translate that in the churches into those witnesses in the past of the church and the present. And you mentioned it in the children's story today, that all of us are called to be witnesses, not just to the children, by the way, but to one another. Husbands and wives are supposed to be witness to each other. You're supposed to be witness to your children. You're supposed to be witness to the other people in your congregation. You're supposed to be a witness to those around you in the community and beyond the community and so forth. Even if it's people you never see and never meet in your life, people are supposed to be in your prayer life because of the joys and the needs that they have, not because it's somebody that you know or even particularly that you might care about. As a matter of fact, sometimes the hardest part is praying for those people that you just can't stand. Now, I know you don't want to admit that, but I'll bet you if you've spent any time in the churches at all, this one or another one, there have probably been people that you couldn't stand. And I've had that experience too. I got called on it one time. We were having in the Quaker tradition, they have this monthly meeting, and it's like the meeting of the elders, you know. And we were talking about something, and one of the people there, she said in front of the other people, she says, well, in this regard, she says, I don't think David likes me. And I was kind of taken aback because, you see, it was the truth. She and I we from the minute we met, we just rubbed each other the wrong way. Have you ever had that? And if she started to say something, I'd get this look on my face, evidently, and she just knew it, even though I didn't say anything. So I was trying not to say anything, well, blah, blah. And one of the other people who was good at discernment looked at me and looked at her and said, don't let him get away with that. Make him tell you what the problem, So we had to have this kind of difficult discussion right there in the meeting. It didn't mean that she and I liked each other any better. That isn't what it says, is it? But you're supposed to care about each other. So it was difficult. It was difficult to do. It's not so hard to do with the people you care about, although sometimes even that's pretty tough, isn't it? I may have told you before that in the Quaker tradition you have these Quaker marriage certificates, and we had ours framed because in that system what it is, it's a great big piece of paper, and it has the dates and so forth, who the people involved are, and what the vows were and so forth. And it also has a place then blank, the rest of that page and over to another page, that everybody who attends signs it, witnessing the marriage, witnessing the vows that you've made to each other. And my wife's joke used to be that there were times, we had it framed and we had it hanging up in the bedroom. And she said, there have been times in my life, she said, I've gone in there and looked real hard at that certificate to remind myself just why it was I'm supposed to care about you. Because let's admit it. We don't always get along. It's one of the things that, when you're counseling people who want to get married or who haven't been married very long, that there's something about those vows and so forth, and that an awful lot of people, they split up in the first or second year the first time somebody burns the toast. It's a serious kind of thing, a commitment to each other, and part of that commitment is praying for each other. Now, one of the things, particularly in the Protestant churches, that we don't talk about very much is this business about the cloud of witnesses being beyond those who are just standing around and that we know and that are in the church currently. The clouds of witnesses have to do with all the saints of the past, all of the people of the church from the past and into the future. They all are witnesses to us. Therefore, the passage from Hebrews where he mentions all these people who've been dead and gone for a long time, they are witnesses to us. The great spiritual writer, St. Bernard of Clairvaux, wrote, and this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago, he said, the saints are longing for us to be with them, and yet we kind of ignore it. We don't pay attention to it. Isn't that a wonderful idea? That the saints, all the saints of the world from forever, long for us to be with them. That's kind of hard sometimes because we have all kinds of differences of opinion about what happens to people after they're dead, And there's part of the church, though, that has this understanding that dead or not, people still care about each other. People from the past. That if there really is some truth to say, isn't that the same thing you say, I hope I see my mother, when I die, or I hope I see this one or that one. And the old song, if you're a cowboy movie enthusiast like I am, you may have noticed this, the great cowboy movie director John Ford made all those Western things. You may notice sometime that in almost every one of them, there's a hymn that plays. And it's either from a negative point of view and sometimes from a positive one. Shall we gather at the river? The beautiful, beautiful river. Gather with who? With the saints at the river. The idea is all of us being together. That's something that can be a matter of discussion and difficulty. One of the ways in which Jesus says, we get in trouble with each other because of our opinions. One of the things to remember is that Jesus says he comes to bring division. The division comes when we disagree with each other, and most of the things we disagree about are opinions. Sometime thing that you ought to read sometime, even though I know it's difficult because it's old-fashioned language, are some of the sermons of John Wesley, the founder of the Methodists and so forth. And he has a wonderful sermon. I don't know how many hours he must have spent to this thing, because the sermon goes on for pages, You just wonder, how long did that guy preach? But anyway, he says in this, it's called Of a Catholic Spirit. And he means by that a universal spirit. And the issue that he brought up was the issue of baptism. He said, there are some people that believe in baptism of children. There are some people that believe that you ought to be of a certain age before you're baptized. There are others in the church who don't baptize at all. He obviously knew some Quakers. And he said, that divides us. He says, well, here's the thing. I can't be of your opinion. I'll hold my opinion. His happened to be that he believed in baptizing babies. He says, but that's my opinion. And I really can't expect to bring you over to my opinion. But I also don't expect you to bring me over to yours. It's not the point. He said, the point is your heart right with God? And then lay opinions aside. This isn't an indifferentism. Sometimes people who talk about, that policies and theological ideas aren't important. They're important. They're opinions that we hold. They're part of what makes us who we are as individuals, makes us who we are as churches. There's a reason why there are Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans and Episcopalians and Catholics and Orthodox and all of those other kinds of groups. There are reasons for that, but it has to do with opinions, differences of opinion about how things ought to be. You all experienced that, didn't you? I know one of the things a couple of years ago, when the first time I was here and so forth, part of the pain was that you were no longer going to be in the kind of relationship you had always been with people that you cared about down the road here at Olive Branch. Isn't that right? You knew that you didn't agree on things, but the problem was a heart problem. People that you're going to miss, people that you cared about, even though you disagreed. That's the point. Mothers and fathers and children and so forth, there are going to be disagreements. I notice there's some kids getting to be about teenagers, and sometimes that can be tough. Even if you have a perfect child. Anybody here ever had a perfect child? Yeah, sometimes I think my kid was perfect until I think about it. I know that isn't true. And we always tried to teach her, though, that there would be things that she would do and things that she would say that her mother and I might not agree with. We might really dislike them. But it didn't kick her out. She was still ours. She was still part of us. And I think that made a difference in her life, through her life, that she knew that even though she could screw it up, that she wasn't going to be dismissed. Because the love bond was there. Well, what's the love bond here? The love bond that Jesus is talking about, that is beside and outside of the divisions, is being close to Christ. Listening to Christ. Not that Christ is going to agree with you necessarily, say, oh, Jesus, those people, if they believe this, that, and the other thing, and we just know if they keep on going like that, they're going to go to the hot place in a hurry. Have you heard that in churches? People that you're just not going to deal with because they're just not right. I get teased sometimes for being so ecumenical. Catholic and Quaker and Methodist. And I grew up in the Lutheran church, even though it wasn't much of churchness to it and so forth. And I've always been around other people, and I've been around some evangelicals, and I've been around Pentecostals and high church people and low church people and so forth. And here's the thing I've discovered. Underneath the opinions, what's important is the closeness to Jesus. Being close to Jesus, listening to what Jesus has to say. Jesus doesn't say, you got to get rid of those people because they're wrong. He never says that. You know, the only real command that Jesus ever gives, and we can repeat this periodically sometimes, the only thing he said you absolutely must do is what? Love God and love your neighbor. Doesn't say anything about agreeing with everything. Doesn't say anything about understanding everything. I know if I'm like you probably, I've got a list of things I'm going to check out when I get to heaven. You know, I would say, okay, Lord, this is fine, but you got to explain to me about this thing here, that I always disagreed with, or it was always a problem. So what we do is, for help in that, is we look to the witnesses around us so that we can be better witnesses ourselves about the love of Christ. I was trying to think of examples of this, and maybe some that you don't know about. And one that I thought that you probably don't know about is a man, of course in the Roman system they end up being called saints. There was a man named Maximilian Kolbe. Did you ever hear that name before? Maximilian Kolbe. He was a priest in Europe, in Poland, between the wars, between the First and Second World War. And he did a lot of things. He started a new group of people who lived in community together and so forth, and followed a certain kind of spiritual discipline and so forth. He was a teacher. He was well educated, had his doctorate and so forth, and he taught and he wrote and so forth. And then the war came along, and people started to be arrested and interred in Poland and so forth. And because he was a priest, and because, like a lot of people in my position, he wouldn't shut up, And so he was arrested and he was sent to Auschwitz. Well, that's one thing in itself, isn't it? Partway through, he'd been there a couple of years, and there was a program at Auschwitz that if somebody tried to escape, everybody was punished. If somebody did escape, then 10 people for every person who escaped would be put into confinement and starved to death. And everybody knew that. And on one occasion, there was a person who escaped and got away and so forth. And so the guards came along and lined everybody up, and just at random went, you, 10 people who were to be put away in a separate place to starve to death. No food, no water, until they died. Maximilian Kolbe knew that one of the men who had been chosen, a Jewish man who had been chosen, had a family and so forth. That didn't make any difference really. And he stepped forward and says, no, he says, I will take his place. And the guards didn't care. They said, okay, you will. And so Maximilian Kolbe was put into the room with these other people to starve to death. And he finally did. But you see, his witness is remembered. You remember the passages where Jesus talks about, it's one thing to give up your life for a friend, people will do that, but how about for somebody that you don't even know? And Kolbe stood up for this other inmate at Auschwitz and gave his life to save another man. We don't know if that other man lived through the experience of Auschwitz, but we know that Maximilian Kolbe died of starvation under the Nazis at Auschwitz. That was remembered. He is a witness to us. That's what the Roman Church means by being a saint, It means you're a great witness to us. And that's what Bernard is talking about, this business about the witnesses, the great witnesses long for us to be with them. But we don't pay much attention to it. We hardly pay attention to the witnesses around us. If somebody were to sit down and ask you, who are the people, the individuals who've had the most influence on your life, would you be able to have a little list? Some people think about, this school teacher, or this person I worked for, or this parent or relative or grandparent or something, so forth. Whoever it is, we all have a list like that. Those people are the witnesses to our life. The ones that give us something that help to make us who we are, and hopefully they are the witnesses who teach us what it is to be close to Christ, regardless of their opinion. I've got some people in my past, in my life, like that woman, that was on the committee and so forth, that I really couldn't stand. And yet there were things that if I think hard enough, I can probably remember. And sometimes I don't remember the stories that I tell all the time and so forth. And I remember people that I absolutely disagree with, and they would do something or say something that would witness to me in a way that was entirely unexpected. It didn't mean that we became buddies. It didn't mean that we were suddenly going to hang out together. As a matter of fact, given the right situation, we'd probably fight like crazy still in the middle of it. Some were other, and still goes on, other pastors. I have one pastor that I've known for a number of years, and he can't understand this business about finding Christ in all sorts of other people. And he gets really disturbed about my ecumenism, being around other kinds of people. And so, well, I'm down there, with the Methodists. Well, how did that ever happen? You ex-monk, you? How did you end up doing that? Or how is it that you get along with those Pentecostals? I've known some Pentecostals I got to be pretty good friends with. Didn't agree with them. They didn't agree with me. They didn't like some of my lifestyle. We've got people, of course, in Wilmington. One of the most effective outreaches in Wilmington is, it sounds funny to people from some kinds of backgrounds because it's called pub theology. You know what that means? It meets on Thursday afternoon in Charlie's Pub in downtown Wilmington, which is the bar attached to the Murphy Theater. And it meets in there for a little happy hour, about 4 o'clock on Thursdays. And then there's a speaker or a panel or something like that, and they talk about religious theological issues together. There have been some people who have joined church through pub theology because they wouldn't step inside the door of a church, many of whom have been damaged by having stepped inside the door of churches, have not been welcomed like they should be welcomed and so forth. I don't know if I told you this story, but there was a church that I was filling the pulpit for a while several years ago, and there had been a shooting across the street from this church 2 days before. And somebody was killed, and it was right next door to the lay leader of the church. But she didn't have anything to do with it, but it was next door to her. And so we were talking about this thing about, this how people are welcome to come into the church. And I said, is everybody welcome? People say, yes, anybody who wants to come through those doors, and blah, blah. And I said, well, how about the person that just shot somebody else in your front yard? What if they walked in the door? Would they be welcomed in the church? It's tough, isn't it? Think about your own community. Think about the people that you know and so forth. Are there people that you would have a hard time if they came into the church? Sure. But you see, what they do is they provide you with the opportunity to do what? To be a witness to what it's really like to be in love with Jesus. To be a person who just follows Jesus, regardless of opinions, regardless of having absolute understandings about what's going on, but who love Jesus and who know that He's with them, caring about them. It's one of the things that I say every once in a while. It's one of the beautiful things about communion. It's why, for instance, we try to have communion, and have a full service around the altar and so forth. We can do it by having somebody bless the elements, and bring them so that we can share communion, because we ought to be able to receive the sacraments. And sometimes it's difficult if you don't have somebody who's the pastor or somebody filling the pulpit who can do that. But it isn't better when you can have the whole thing, when you can stand together around the altar and have the prayers and so forth. And one of the things to remember in the history of the spirituality of the church is that that's one of the times specifically, it's always the case, but it's one of the specific times when you can be assured that all the saints, all the clouds of witnesses are with us each time. Not just the 20 or 30 people who happen to be here, not just the people we're thinking about praying for, but all the clouds of witnesses through all the centuries and the generations are sharing it with us, are with us, witnessing to us as we witness to one another, and hopefully in some ways as we can take what happens there and witness to other people about it, to invite other people to be part of it. I'm not sure that one of the places I have disagreements in theology are things that talk about closed communion. You must be this or you must be that or the other thing in order to receive communion. It's one of the things I love about the United Methodist Church is we practice what's called an open table. If you're convinced that you're called to come here and receive communion, if you believe that Christ is present and calling you to do it, then you come ahead. You don't have to fill out a form. You don't have to stand up and agree to everything. Just come. That to me is what communion is really about. Is drawing people into the love relationship of the witnesses. The witnesses through the centuries, the witnesses in this place, the witnesses that we become as we witness to people outside of ourselves. I think it's important. I think it's much more important than agreeing on this or that doctrine or this or that idea about who belongs and who doesn't belong and who ought to be shut out and who ought not to be shut out. I had a terrible time a number of years ago. There was a young woman who was dating a fellow from another church. And the pastor of that other church approached the boy's family and said to him, "You've got to break up that relationship between that boy, between your son and that young woman." They said, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, you know, she belongs to that Quaker church, and they not only don't use the King James Bible, they've got a woman who's the pastor. And they were threatening to kick the family out of their church if they didn't discipline the son." I don't know about you, I wouldn't have lasted through the whole conversation. I'd have been out the door real quick, you know. But why do we do that to each other? That's an extreme example. We do that to each other, and sometimes we think it's right, and we think, well, we're just fulfilling the prophecy that Jesus said we to be against each other. He says, yes, because of me. Because of the relationship with me and what that means about the kind of person you're supposed to be. Remember that this comes in Luke after the last several weeks where we've been reading through the gospel about how it is we're supposed to be followers of Jesus. And it doesn't say anything about opinions or doing it the right way or the wrong way or anything like that. It has to do with being close to Christ. And that's what we're called to be witnesses to. Is my life a life that's lived close to Christ? And if it is, then I ought to have ways to witness to that. It doesn't mean that I have to go out. You know, you can... A pain in the neck and lower down, too, are some of those people who always want to witness to you. Right? Want to talk you into it. It's not that. It's living the life of love that you have, and if somebody asks you, why do you live a life that's that loving and that caring and that you worry about other people and so received because of Christ? It hasn't got anything to do with you agreeing with me or my agreeing with you. It has to do with being in relationship to Christ. And whether or not we like it, we all are in that relationship. It's a matter of knowing it, living it, and then witnessing to it. Amen.